What is up, guys? Thank you for stopping in. So FatMan put out a thread on the whole Suzu 3 Arrows Capital situation, Kyle Davies. So we're going to read that thread. It's pretty long, so I'm going to skip all of my dialogue, pretty much head straight to the thread. And I figured this would give us, it's kind of like a good wrap-up of everything we know so far, where things are headed. And I figured, it'd probably be a good end to the series that we've been creating. So I'm not going to talk much more about the 3 Arrows Capital situation after this, unless something major comes about that is just mind-blowing. Then I'll make a video on it. But I figured this would be kind of a good end cap to these videos that I've been making and putting out there for you guys, just on the situation as a whole. And again, it kind of sums everything up for us. So getting to the FatMan thread, for those of you who don't know, before we get into that, FatMan Terra was an account created on Twitter that was covering the whole Terra situation. He's definitely an insider. He knows lots of people, good connections, have cited lots of sources, and is pretty factual on his reporting, or at least he has a lot of good supporting evidence for the claims that he makes. So this thread, though, is based on the 3AC situation, and his account has kind of shifted to just covering all the craziness that has been going on, because lots and lots has happened since even just a couple weeks ago. So the thread starts, it says, Suzu is now back in Singapore working with a law firm specializing in white-collar crime. He really doesn't want to go to prison, and creditors are after him. But how did it get to this point? Where did 3AC go wrong, and what should you do next? So, the degen trade. 3 Arrows Capital had a massive margin long on Bitcoin with a liquidation price of around 24K. So I was actually wrong. I thought most of their money was in Ethereum. It turns out a lot of it was Bitcoin, actually. They were using Grayscale and other means to pull these trades off. They kept this a secret even from their partners, because they didn't think it would be realistically go that low. So they didn't think the Bitcoin price would go as low as it did. Terra LFG market conditions sent Bitcoin plunging. So really this all stems from the Terra situation. When Terra fell apart and they sold everything, and everything with them totally went under, because remember, Terra was buying lots of Bitcoin to put in their treasury to help that. But then they ended up later having to sell all that Bitcoin so that they could cover the peg and help support the peg, which they ended up selling all the Bitcoin at a loss. It turned into a whole big issue, and because of all the selling pressure from Terra, it drove the Bitcoin price way down past that 24K point, and then as soon as that happened, it triggered 3 Arrows Capital's liquidations, which caused it to shoot down even further. So that's kind of how we ended up where we are right now, and why that cascading this last few weeks have been absolutely nuts. The margin calls. Counterparties tried to contact 3AC to ask for collateral, but they ghosted everyone. They were forced to liquidate 3 Arrows Capital's positions, causing Bitcoin to drop further from 24K to 20K. So that's what I was just talking about. This move kicked off a spiral of cascades and bank runs for several parties. Again, all of this links together. When one drives things down, then the next has to sell, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how, again, we ended up where we are now. The painful losses. After the first default, Hidden Road, losses were exacerbated. Genesis allegedly faced high 9-figure losses and will sue BlockFi and BitMEX. BlockFi and BitMEX had some exposure, but not much. Jeez, can't talk there. Other minorly affected parties include Cumberland, Galaxy, and Durabit. I can fix her. During the collapse, in a desperate bid for liquidity, 3 Arrows Capital solicited Bitcoin from whales and trading firms. They lied about the fund's AUM, didn't disclose the degen long, and promised an estimated 20% yield on whatever they got. Most funds smelt a rat. So what he's saying here is that, and this kind of goes to all the confusion of what really 3 Arrows Capital's AUM was, because they kept telling people they had lots of cash, they were flush with cash, and they didn't, they weren't borrowing much money and all this other stuff, and so they were effectively hiding a lot of the loans that they did take out. And so by doing that, a lot of other funds couldn't gauge the risk 3 Arrows Capital had, the exposure, the amount of leverage they were using, when in fact they almost had no cash on hand. They lost most of it in Luna, and so they were really in a bad place. And so what he's saying here is most funds smelt this. They realized that they were in a bad spot, but some didn't. Some still lent them the money, as we know. And then 20% yield on the money they give them is just absurd. That's a lot. The collateral damage. Smaller market makers allegedly use 3AC's trading account as a prime broker to get fee discounts. Some of these entities, like 8 Blocks Capital, which we made a video on talking about, and have accused 3AC of stealing their funds without permission. Amounts as much or as low as $1 million. So again, we made a video on this. If you aren't aware of the full story, you might want to go check out those videos. They'll go into more of an elaborate approach and breakdown of each sort of stage of what FatMan is outlining here. The degen loan. In one of the most degen loans of all time, Voyager lent around $700 million to 3 Arrows Capital, uncollateralized. What does uncollateralized mean? That means that they didn't post any collateral. That means Voyager basically gave them a credit card. So what happens when you default on a credit card? It's not like they come and take the stuff that you bought on the credit card, right? There's nothing there to take. So that's essentially what they're talking about, uncollateralized. They used interest payments to provide retail-facing yield through their platform and skimmed a cut for themselves. Upon this revelation, Voyager fell over 50%. The damage report. Most of 3 Arrows Capital's remaining assets are in the form of illiquid equity investments like Durbit, Starkware. Their L1 tokens have crashed heavily, so this is just an estimate. Assets, so the estimated assets are around $400 million, so that's what they hold on hand. Debts are around $2 billion. Net worth is negative $1.6 billion. Absolute insanity. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Their next move, there will be lawsuits. There will be liquidations. Creditors will come for everything they possibly can. There's a fair chance 3AC did something illegal, especially in their final days, and they will try to stay out of prison and resolve everything cleanly. Most creditors will never be paid because there simply isn't enough money to go around. Around $1.6 billion is gone. Money that went to Bitcoin miners who dumped their position in large funds with open shorts, perhaps even a fund who is extending bailouts right now. In the face of this knowledge, what should you do? There's one crucial, actionable piece of advice. Pull all of your money out of centralized yield services like BlockFi, Voyager, Nexo for the time being. It's not worth the risk. Withdraw it to your ledger. So what FatMan is saying here, look, when you give your money to these, like BlockFi, where you go to get yield, they're essentially lending that money out. So you don't want your money to be in these things that could potentially be affected by the 3 Arrows Capital situation, because if they lent your money to 3 Arrows Capital and 3 Arrows Capital is not paying them, someone is going to have to take the hit there. And if Voyager or BlockFi or whoever it is doesn't have the money to absorb that hit, guess who's going to pay that cost? You, with the money you have deposited in. That's why you'll see things like Celsius where they halt withdrawals. They're doing that because they quite literally do not have the money to give you to withdraw. So that's why that happens. Bailout loans help with cash flow, but they don't get the money back. Additionally, these services will have to introduce heavy interest rate cuts due to market conditions and lower availability of lending counterparties, making the reward less worth it. So, with less people borrowing, the demand for borrowed assets is going to go down, which is going to drive the interest rates down. So you're not going to make as much on your money in these things anyway. There's no reason to have money in these services right now because their long-term viability is uncertain and you are gambling on solvency. You will potentially give up 0.5% in yield or less once they reduce rates, but you lower your risk massively. So, and I cannot stress this enough, bring all of your coins into self-custody until yields stabilize and the situation is clear. This is a wise, risk-adjusted decision given the scenario, and you can always come back later. Stay safe and stay vigilant. So this was a really good thread by FatMan outlining the whole 3 Arrows Capital situation, summarizing it in a nutshell here. Again, a lot of this stuff we went into in more detail on some of my other videos, but if you've been following along with that, this is where we stand today. And I think FatMan's advice at the end there to get your money out of centralized projects is a really good idea. These DeFi as a whole, I think, is at risk right now. So until we really know where things stand with 3 Arrows Capital, what the contagion is really, I keep mispronouncing that word. And if they're going to get bailed out from someone like Sam, who we've seen bail out numbers of projects lately, he's been doing it like everywhere. I think he even helped with the Voyager situation, which there's some speculation around that too. I'm not going to get into that in this video. But until we see a clear answer on the 3AC situation, it's best to just kind of back away from some of the yield producing stuff, DeFi, BlockFi, Voyager, things like that. Because again, we just don't know how far this goes. And pretty soon, I'd say give it a few more weeks, we'll know pretty well who is all affected, because they will either be running still or in a lot of trouble. So I hope you guys like this video. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.